with Ronald Hereda and our special guest, Dan Snyder, and we're talking about nonviolence. Dan was saying before that he's a proponent of nonviolence, and it doesn't matter where it comes from, if it's deeply spiritual or if it's pragmatic, strategic. So, in that vein, what are the advantages of nonviolent conflict over violent conflict? You know, if somebody is in this circle of militarism and they have a choice between violence or nonviolence, how would you try to sway them? What?
Well, I would try to persuade them on the basis of effectiveness rather than ethics. I don't think it's particularly convincing to tell somebody that war is wrong if they've already made up their mind that that's what they need to do. And there are instances, it won't sit well with some of the pacifists listening, but there are instances where I think nonviolence probably is not going to be effective. When the situation is deteriorated to the point, I think a good example was after the breakup of Yugoslavia, the ethnic horrors that were going on there were to such an extent. I'm not convinced that nonviolence would have been effective in that situation. So I'm not opposed to strategic, limited, peacekeeping military intervention. It's analogous to the situation right after September 11th, 2001. I was teaching at Pendle Hill and teaching a class on nonviolence, and a student asked me, said, so do you think that the people in that airplane on Flight 93 over eastern Pennsylvania, do you think they were wrong to bring that plane down? You see, that's the kind of question that you would ask a pacifist who's opposed to violence on all counts.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it wasn't wrong. The situation had deteriorated to such a point that their nonviolent options were practically nil. So when you look at this pragmatically, you have to look at situations where nonviolence can work and when it can't work. Now, having said that, the way to move into the kind of situation that we're in now is plan now for those future events. It's possible to act nonviolently now in such a way that will prevent the unfoldment of a scenario like that.
Right.
Had we had a different foreign policy, you know, you can look back and think of all kinds of reasons that might have led to a different scenario on September 11th.
Right, and going back in history a little bit further, a lot of people call World War II the good war because it was fought for good reasons. Well, that's very debatable, but the strong argument is, how could you stand up to Hitler when he's invading your country? How could you do that non-violently? But as you said, if you go back in history a little bit and you see the violence that came out of World War I, and the violence was economic violence directed against Germany.
That's right.
And had there been a more equitable solution to World War I rather than the Versailles Treaty, we wouldn't have had World War II, and there wouldn't have been the breeding ground for Hitler and his cohorts.
That's right. You prevent future wars by creating present justice.
Mm-hmm.
That's the formula for preventing future wars. Once you're in the war, it's a different story often. But to prevent war in the future, you must create justice now. You know, and often you might find yourself in a situation where your options are very limited. You know, the favorite question that people ask pacifists is, somebody breaks in your house and pulls a gun on your grandmother, what are you going to do? My answer is work harder for gun control. But you see, that addresses a future situation rather than immediate one.
Yeah.
Right.
But you know, let me come, just because you mentioned World War II, one of the things that a lot of people are very unaware of is that nonviolence was actually used against Hitler.
Oh, yeah.
And when it was used, it was effective. The only reason it wasn't used more is that people were not aware of it.
Right.
And often they weren't aware of what they were doing when they were doing it. But there are some quite inspiring and dramatic instances of nonviolence being effective against the Third Reich.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, in an effort to raise awareness, I just want to point out that in addition to VFP-TV and radio, the Western North Carolina chapter of Veterans for Peace also produces the War Crimes Times, a quarterly publication which is updated and archived at warcrimestimes.org. So you can see the latest edition, the updates, the archives of our quarterly publication, the War Crimes Times, of which...
The new edition is in the works. It'll be out in about 3 or 4 weeks.
Just in time for the new year.
That's right.
Oh boy, I haven't even finished reading this one yet.
One of the things we're going to feature is some of the revelations by WikiLeaks. We'll also have some photos of the December 16th event at the White House.
And he knows of which he speaks because Kim is the editor-in-chief of the War Crimes Times.
Don't call me chief.
No, don't call me chief. Okay. Well, if you have any questions or comments about our show, or if you would like to be a guest or suggest a guest or topic, you may, or if you'd like to support VFP TV and radio, you may email us at vfptv@live.com. That's vfptv@live.com. So we're getting got a little more than 5 minutes. We got about 7 minutes. So with that in mind,
I think we can solve the world's problems. I think.
All right.
Hey, you know, somebody
Yes.
who really is solving the world's problems, which I think is very inspiring, since part of my agenda is to keep making plugs for these websites. Are you familiar with the TED Talks? TED.com.
That's TED.
TED.com.
Where I have seen some of those on.
No, tell us about it.
Well, this is an utterly fascinating organization that gets some of the most creative thinkers across a wide variety of fields to talk about what they're doing, what sorts of innovations, and they're from everything from literature and the arts, the sciences, politics, you name it. It's across the board. The only requirement is that it's creative and it's innovative, and they have archived many talks from some of these people. If you go to TED.com and look at their archive of talks, you'll see hundreds of examples of this constructive program. In other words, people doing things in their communities that are very creative, that are completely nonviolent, that are all about justice and peace. So while we're complaining about the state of the world or political problems or the government in Washington, let's not forget to look at the truly inspiring and wonderful things that people are doing every day right here in Asheville, not to mention lots of other places around the world.
Sadly, you have to actively seek this information out since the corporate press is not prone to advertise or publicize this type of activity. But this smacks of a grassroots groundswell
Very much so.
resistance to the.
We need more media like VFP TV and radio to get the word out, don't we?
I like that idea. All right.
That's right.
And yes, well, we have the TV, VFP TV, and radio. We're on FM radio station, Main FM, and we're also here on the UR radio. And then we have the our publication. So we're going to give Rupert a run for his money. Of course, he has a lot more money than we do, but hey, we're working on that part too.
Yeah.
So, Dan, given the state of the world, given the massive amount of, is it nuclear or nuclear weapons?
Weapons, right.
And the stores of conventional weapons, all the weaponry we have in the world, it seems to me that unless we learn nonviolence, we're doomed.
I think so. I think so. In fact, you'll find a lot of people who would agree with that. I don't know if you're familiar with Jonathan Shell's book, The Unconquerable World.
I don't know that one.
That's
I've heard of Jonathan
another
Shell.
resource for people who are interested. He would agree with that. If you look at A Force More Powerful,
Oh.
Ackerman and Duvall,
Mhm.
that book and their video series,
Mhm.
very inspiring. But
Okay, would you? I'm sorry. Just repeat the title of those two books again.
Two books. One is called A Force More Powerful. It's not only a book, but it's also a DVD.
Ah,
That's very interesting. Authors are Ackerman and Duvall. And the other one is Jonathan Shell's book, The Unconquerable World. Both excellent resources. But there are a lot of people who would agree with what you just said, that we have got to learn nonviolence, because certainly business as usual is a very destructive course.
I posit that we already know nonviolence. We just had to allow it more room for expression.
That's right. Yeah. Teach it, practice it, learn about it, every opportunity you get.
And you support that nonviolent spirit in other people by demonstrating it in your own walk
That's
of
right.
life.
That's right.
Well, that's real important. I think nonviolence, peace, starts with the individual. How can you have interpersonal, irresolvable differences and then profess to tell your government that they should stop war?
Well, actually, again, I'm going to be devil's advocate. Given that most of us human beings are fairly broken in many ways, and that we are a long ways from enlightenment, I think we have to tell the government to stop war, even though we ourselves are probably complicit.
No, but
internally as well.
What I'm saying is we have to be working on ourselves
Absolutely.
simultaneously.
You know,
and understanding that we have this ongoing conflict.
We do. I realize we're running out of time, but one of the most interesting things that has happened in my own life, having studied both the politics of nonviolent action and psychology and theology, is that I see all these parallels, that the dynamics of transformation in the political world are very similar to the dynamics of transformation in the therapy office and the dynamics of transformation spiritually. That there is a nonviolent inner world that can be accessed. And when I'm thinking theologically, my model of God is nonviolent. God is the nonviolent activist within who is overthrowing an oppressive regime that we have somehow allowed to dominate our inner world. Back to the first caller and his comments about white people needing to learn to love. I say he's absolutely right. And how do you do that? You move to that inward place where the nonviolent God is overthrowing that sense of whiteness as privileged, and so on. But as white people, we're schooled in that, and we have to have access to it, to a method and an internal practice that helps us learn that.
I heard an interesting a quote today. I don't remember who it's attributed to, but it said that God created good and evil and called it religion. So we're about wrapped up.
Dan, would you be willing to come back and chat on this show?
I can talk about this stuff for hours, so I'll come back as often as you want me to.
Oh, that'd be great.
Fantastic. Thank you. Our theme song, A Soldier's Story, was written and performed by Stat Kenny. VFP-TV and Radio is co-produced by Kasha Baxter and Ronald Hereda, with technical support from David Ireland. Our snail mail address is Chapter 099, P.O. Box 356, Mars Hill, NC 28754. Once again, that's Chapter 099, P.O. Box 356, Mars Hill, North Carolina 28754. Our email address here is vfptv@live.com. And that about wraps up our show for today. I'm Ronald Hereda.
I'm Kim Carlisle.
And I'm Dan Snyder.
If you want to get in contact with Dan Snyder, it's danielosnyder.com. That's SNYDER, danielosnyder.com. Look at his website and
I'm happy to respond to requests.